Shine like the artist you are with double exposures. Double exposure effects blend multiple photos together for incredible, exciting results. And you can create these trendy effects too using a few essential tools in Photoshop. Hey everyone, my name is Melody Nieves for Envato Tuts Plus, and I'm super excited to bring you this course, How to Create a Double Exposure Effect in Adobe Photoshop. I'm a digital artist and instructor with over 400 articles online, as someone who just loves to share the art of creation with everyone. So in this course, we'll learn the key tips and tricks for creating cool and professional-looking double exposures using portraits, cityscapes, and so much more. Let's take a sneak peek at our lessons. First, we'll tackle the do's and don'ts of double exposures. Find out which photography works best and learn all the essential tools to help make images fit perfectly together. Then, we'll jump into each effect. Inspired by a lovely series of photos and assets from Envato Elements, we'll take advantage of this amazing subscription to create a cityscape, duotone, and surreal-themed double exposure effect. So, ready to get started? Me too. Let's begin with the next lesson. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this course. In this lesson, we'll dive into the do's and don'ts of double exposure effects and go over essential tools in Photoshop for achieving highly effective results. Let's begin. In the beginning, double exposure effects can seem pretty easy, but if you're not careful about your composition and photo choices, you may run into a few problems. Take these test pieces I created for example. Admittedly, they're not too bad in style, and with a little editing, they could probably be even better. But there was one thing that was missing for me, and that is a certain magical quality. Double exposure effects are highly dependent on the stock photos you choose. So when considering this effect, try to search for stocks with distinct-looking features. Let's start with the stocks I used for the cityscape. I was super happy and impressed with this series of photos available on Envato Elements. In fact, all the images you see in this course are available with your Elements subscription. One of the first things that stands out is the mood. High fashion portraits are great for double exposures because they have less of that cheese factor we often see in stock photography. They also have the ability to blend well with other types of photos, like this nighttime cityscape. What works for this particular final result is studying the general mood. This model has a standard, moody model vibe, with a slight pout and high fashion poses. If you check out the series of photos shot by the same photographer, you can see how each pose dramatically changes the mood of the photo. When picking photos for your final effect, keep in mind that cropping affects your composition too. I immediately knew I wanted to find photos that blended well with this close-up shot. But for a more impactful composition, I also needed to find photos that were taken far away too. So while the initial close-up shot works, it's important that I don't include more photos that are awkwardly cropped. Pictures where the model is either hidden by objects or cut off in the scene probably won't blend as well into the final design. Another great thing that works is finding a series of photos of the same model. Let's take a look at how this applies with our duotone double exposure. Again, high fashion photography or high-end portraiture works best for this result. But you can also make do with a simple series of photos of the same model shot at different angles. I was lucky enough to stumble across this blonde model featuring a super cute outfit with a bowler hat and furry coat. Even little details like this can make a huge impact on the quality of your effect. So what I find works best is giving yourself a list of quick questions to ask when searching for photos. What is the energy of this photo? How does the outfit affect the mood? Does the emotion read clearly? How can I use this emotion? What are the colors and what do they represent symbolically? And how hard will it be to blend these photos together? Speaking of blending photos together, let's consider the role different compositions play and how hard it will be to achieve these effects. If you want to create double exposures like the first two, what usually helps is picking models that are clearly within the shot, in standard poses. Awkwardly cropped shots may become unusable unless they're magical on their own. But for the third double exposure, the effect is not as simple. This effect requires us to put all our photo manipulation skills to the test by studying different photo compositing techniques. To build a surrealistic theme, we'll start with a hand stretched out on a tree. Many might find this image unusable, but I know a quick layer mask will do the trick for removing the unwanted background. Then, we settle on a landscape image that is hard to overlook. Roads have a way of symbolizing different paths in our lives, and the added fog brings more mystery and allure to this shot. To bring more focus on this symbolism, we can also add a quick silhouette to bring it all together. See how it works now? By following this surreal theme, I can select photos that fit the mood. An awkward pop of color or misplaced object would definitely throw the entire composition off. With all this in mind, let's make a quick review of the do's and don'ts of selecting photos. Do: pick quality, well-lit photos of your models. Study their body language, poses, and expression. Plan your composition around their outfit and general mood, and experiment with different landscapes, portraits, and cityscapes for the desired effect. On the other hand, try not to pick awkwardly cropped photos, as well as images with smaller sizes or resolutions that may distort when adjusted. Don't pick difficult compositions that require further editing, or themed photos that don't pair well together. In order to make the most out of the double exposure effect, we'll be using these essential tools in Adobe Photoshop, and I'll be using the latest version of Creative Cloud. Feel free to take some time to study them on your own if you're having any difficulty. Layer masks. Layer masks are essential for this effect. They hide any unwanted parts of our photos non-destructively by painting black onto the layer mask. Reveal these areas again by painting white onto the mask or choosing to delete or disable the same mask. Clipping masks. Clipping masks are great for organization and more. By setting a new layer, shape, or adjustment as a clipping mask to another, you'll keep images from spilling over into the next. The clip layer is bound by the edges of the one below it that it's clipped to, but you can also move it around pretty freely to try out different effects. Adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are often highly underused ways to change the color, intensity, and saturation of your photo. It personally took me a few years to use them, but now I love them for the added control in my work. In this series, we'll use adjustment layers like gradient map, color lookup, and curves to make the necessary changes to our composition for a seamless blend. Now that you have a better understanding of which photos to use, as well as the tools required for double exposures, let's move on to creating fantastic double exposure effects. We'll start with the cityscape exposure in our next lesson. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this course. In this lesson, I'll show you how to create the first double exposure effect, which is inspired by these beautiful fashion photos and an incredible city scene. One of the reasons why I love this particular photo series is because the images fit so well together. When I work with digital manipulations, I tend to start with the original photo that inspired me. In this case, it'll be this lovely fashion shot taken of the model a few steps away. So, let's begin. Let's make the background layer into a regular layer. Double-click the background, then name it Original. Now select the close-up shot of the model. Hold Ctrl-A to select the entire photo, then copy and paste it above the original. I'll be naming this layer Model 2 since it's the second photo of the series. Before we move on to the double exposure effect, it's important to address some weak points in the photo. Now, I can really appreciate when a photographer has a great camera and can get all of these lovely details of their model. But unfortunately, some small details might get away from the photographer, like chapped lips, pimples, things that we can't really adjust until we work on it in Photoshop. So to edit the lips for a much smoother look, I'll be using the stamp tool to repair certain areas with more layers of skin. Select the stamp tool and hold the Alt key to create a source area that we'll use to paint onto the photo. At first, adjust the opacity to 100% to get a better understanding of how much you'll need to repair the lips. Later on, we can adjust the opacity and bring it back down to around 50% for a much softer look. When working on the lips, it's important to understand that less is more. Smooth out these areas where the skin might be breaking, but don't go too overboard or else it'll be obvious. You can also affect the general structure of the lips when working on creating more balance. Source areas from the center of the lips to help bring more balance outward. Keep going until you're happy with the result. Here is a before and after look of our results so far. Before we move on to the double exposure effect, let's continue retouching this image. Now I'll move on to the skin. Let's clean up some of these areas where the pores are showing through very clearly. Again, this is the result of having a really great camera, but it's important that we learn how to dial these details back so that they're not too jarring or not too obvious and might distract from our final result. Just like before, we'll keep the stamp tool selected and hold the Alt key to select certain areas of the skin that we want to clean up. If you ever have a moment when you feel like you might have sourced the wrong part of the skin, simply hit Ctrl-Z to undo that effect. For this part, I just want to diminish the look of the pores a little bit more so that they're not too obvious. I'll focus my attention on the nose and certain areas around the cheeks and lips for a much cleaner look. When it comes to photo retouching, it's really all about personal preference. Now that we've completely finished retouching our photo, let's take a look at the before and after. A little bit of retouching goes a long way, so keep this in mind when working on this photo. Now that we have beautiful clear skin and much softer lips, we can move on to the rest of this effect. If you're just starting out with double exposure effects or you're trying to create this look with an image of your own, keep in mind that we'll be using these early phases to navigate the composition. And by taking our time, we'll be able to create the effect we want without feeling like there are any areas that don't belong. Select the document for the city image. Hold Ctrl-A to select the entire image, then copy and paste it onto a new layer. If you get a message like this, don't worry, just select OK. Then, rename this layer City. It's always a good idea ahead of time to see if the images are going to work together. You can do this by playing with different layer blend modes. In this case, I'm going to set the layer blend mode of the city to screen to see how it applies. Already, it's a beautiful effect. Now select the original layer and hold Ctrl-J to create a duplicate. Position this duplicate above the second model photo and rename it Model 1. Now, if you're wondering, we won't be using the original photo layer. I just like to have a copy nearby so that I can always flip back and forth to see if my effect is working out. If you keep the visibility of the city layer still on, it'll blend over the original model. So feel free to hide the visibility so we can work on it later. To create a better sense of depth of field, I've decided to place this photo in front of the close-up shot for a much better look. But once the image is above the second model photo, we'll need to remove the background so that it can show all the way through. We'll do this simply with a layer mask. Select the Model 1 layer and add a layer mask. Now grab the polygonal lasso tool and create a quick selection around the model. It doesn't matter if it's a little rough, we'll be able to adjust it later. Once the selection is made, right-click and select Inverse Selection. Now grab the Paint Bucket tool and make sure the foreground and background colors are set to black and white. With the layer mask still selected, fill the mask with black. Now we've removed a big portion of the background. To refine the mask even more, we'll need to go in and adjust it ourselves. We can do this simply by using the brush tool. Select the brush tool and use a hard round brush with 100% hardness and 100% opacity. Use this brush to paint black onto the layer mask to continue removing the background. We want to make sure the edges, at least for now, are as crisp as possible. If you're having trouble working around the model, feel free to use the rotation tool to rotate the canvas. This is actually a technique many digital artists use for their digital paintings. In traditional art, when we're drawing a single image, we're able to rotate the paper whenever we need to so that we can create much cleaner curves and crisper lines. So far, I'm not really feeling the city image above the model, so let's bring it down a layer so that it's behind her. One of the great things about manipulations is that sometimes you can use the same photo for different effects. In this case, I'll be using several copies of the city image to create more bokeh around the effect. Select the city layer and hit Ctrl-J twice to duplicate it 2 times. Temporarily hide the visibility so that we can concentrate on their positioning. Position the first copy above Model 1. Now right-click to create a clipping mask. Move the city copy around to figure out where you would like to position the bokeh. Try out different arrangements until you have an effect you like. You may also need to resize the image. Hold Ctrl-T and use the Free Transform tool to make the image much smaller. Continue moving the image around until you found the perfect position. Now create a layer mask for the city copy. Use a soft round brush with 0% hardness to mask out the areas that cover her jacket. When you're finished, set the layer blend mode to lighter color. Now let's work on the second city copy. To create more bokeh in the background, I'll just be using this second layer. Like our previous step, make sure to set the layer blend mode to lighter color. Hold Ctrl-T to free transform the image, bringing it down even smaller to create a cluster of bokeh in the background. For a little more depth of field, we can create a slight blur. To do this, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and set the radius to 8 pixels. Now add a layer mask to the blurred copy. Use a soft round brush again to begin eliminating part of the background. Eliminating these areas will also create a subtle vignette-like effect, which I actually really like. Adjust the layer opacity as desired. Before we move on, let's address these crisp edges that we created from our original layer masking. Select the Model 1 layer and use a soft round brush to paint black onto the layer. Soften the edges around the outfit, hair, and face for a more seamless blend. Now select the Model 1 layer and create a new layer. Let's reflect some of that light onto our model. Position this layer above the city copy. Now set the layer to soft light. Use a soft round brush and a light tan color to paint light onto the model. Just keep the light where the bokeh already sits. Great job so far on creating this double exposure look. The majority of this composition is complete, but all we need to do is color correct the image. Let's begin by creating a new layer above the rest. Select the gradient tool. Create a dark blue to transparent linear gradient in the bottom third of the composition. Set the layer blend mode to lighten when you're finished and adjust the opacity to 80%. For more control over the color scheme, we can use simple adjustment layers. Create a new adjustment layer of color lookup. Then set the 3D LUT file to crisp warm and the opacity to 25%. Slowly but surely, we're getting to a color scheme that I really like. So now create a new adjustment layer of gradient map. Test out different gradients to see which one fits best. In this case, I'm using a custom color scheme that goes from blue to white. When you're through, set the layer blend mode to soft light and the opacity to 30%. Create a new adjustment layer of channel mixer. For the red output channel, change the settings to 92, 2, -7, and 10. Then switch over to the green channel. Now set the settings to 0, 107, 0 again, and 2. For the last output channel, the blue channel, change the settings to these numbers, -5, 23, 100, and -15. If you're a bit of a stickler like me, you might continue pushing the color adjustments even further. Create a new layer and use the paint bucket tool to fill it with a light blue color. Now set the layer blend mode to color burn and lower the opacity to 24%. Now let's create a new layer dedicated to a slight fade. We'll do this by creating a new layer and using the gradient tool to create an orange to transparent linear gradient. Set the layer blend mode to exclusion and lower the opacity to 13%. Now we've completed this look. To see the difference from the beginning, feel free to add a new group to place all your new layers into. Flip back and forth between the original and your new composition to see the beautiful city double exposure in action. I really hope you enjoyed creating this effect. Let's move on to our next lesson, where we'll learn how to create a colorful duotone double exposure. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course. In this next lesson, we'll be merging two trendy effects in one. We'll create a duotone double exposure with exciting pink and blue colors. Just like in our last effect, we'll be using two photos of the same model to create this double exposure look. In this case, we have a stunning blonde model with a high fashion look featuring a fur coat and cute bowler hat. Let's get started. When it comes to creating the duotone look, it's important to select photos with a very powerful expression. It's even better if you can get two photos of the same model facing different directions. The first picture has her looking off to the side, while the second picture is much more straight on. This will create a dramatic effect that is moody and high fashion. Start by adding the second model photo onto this document. Hold Ctrl-A to select the image, then copy and paste it above the first model layer. Even though I usually like to work directly onto the original photos, sometimes I realize that the photo size is just too big. So to save file space, you can go to Image, Image Size, and decrease the value of the width and height. Here, I'll change the width to 1500 pixels for a much smaller document size. Select the background layer and turn it into a regular layer. Do this by double-clicking it and renaming it Model 1. Then rename the second layer Model 2. To complete this particular look, we'll need to separate this model from the background. To do this, grab the polygonal lasso tool and create a rough selection around the model. Make sure to keep in mind that in this photo, the bowler hat gets lost in the dark background, so give yourself a little bit more room with your selection. Once your model is selected, hold Ctrl-J to paste the selection onto a new layer. In order to fit both images into this composition, we'll need to move the model to the side. So use the Move tool to bring the new model layer over to the left until her hand just hits the edge. If you're working with different photos for your duotone look, keep in mind that this next step might not be necessary, especially if you have a clear white background. All you'll have to do is eliminate it completely. But in this case, we'll need to create that dark blue look yet again. In order to get a color that matches the background as much as we can, we'll need to source the color with the eyedropper tool. To do this, hold the Alt key to source this color as your new foreground color. Select the Model 1 layer and create a new layer above it. Then fill the layer with dark blue. With the base of the composition set, let's take a quick moment to reorganize our layers. Set the background layer to BG, then rename Model 1 to Original and the new layer copy to Model 1. Unhide the visibility of the second model layer to create another selection. Use the polygonal lasso tool again to create a rough selection around the model. This photo is a little bit more clear than before, so this time we'll be able to see exactly where we need to work around the hat. Once the selection is complete, select the Model 2 layer and right-click to select the inverse. Delete the background, then position the model to the lower right side. If you need to, take a quick moment to continue reconfiguring the composition to one that you like. You can resize the image in the front for a much better look, or keep the photos at relatively the same size. Now refine the mask for the Model 1 layer. Select the brush tool and use a soft round brush with 0% hardness. Switch the foreground and background color to black and white to paint black onto your layer mask to hide the rest of the background. Zoom into the areas that are particularly difficult, like around the hair, face, and coat. If you need to, lower the size of your brush so that you can get into the tight crevices of the fur. Since the image blends well with the dark background we already created, this step is relatively easy. Feel free to erase more parts of the coat for a much more softer effect. Once the first photo is complete, it's time to move on to the second layer. Now add a layer mask to the Model 2 layer. Using the same soft round brush from before, begin to mask away the harsh edges of the photo originally created by the polygonal lasso tool. Just like in our previous manipulation, we can use the rotation tool to help us get around these edges. So rotate the canvas to help you create a cleaner mask around the hair and hat. Switch over to a hard round brush with 100% hardness to help you refine the edges of the bowler hat. Keep going until you have a similar result like this one. Now switch back to a soft round brush and make the brush much larger in size. Mask away the harsh edges of the Model 2 layer that start to interfere with the background photo. Here I decided to keep the effect really soft by allowing the hand in the back to show through. As you get further along with the composition, now we can begin experimenting with layer blend modes. So set the layer blend mode for the Model 2 layer to lighten. Notice this area around the model's lips? We'll need to refine the mask of the Model 1 layer again to help the photo in the front show through. Use a soft round brush to do so, and feel free to not take off too much. Now for the color. To create this duotone effect, we'll be using adjustment layers and beautiful gradients. Create a new adjustment layer of gradient map above the Model 1 layer. To make sure this gradient only affects the left model, right-click the layer to create a clipping mask. Now feel free to click through the different gradient map presets to find a color scheme you'll like. I decided to go with this beautiful custom-made blue and orange gradient. Once you add the first gradient map, you'll start to notice the edges of your photos a lot more. So make sure you go back to the layer mask and refine them with a hard round brush. Now let's color the front photo. Create another new adjustment layer for gradient map. Right-click the layer and select clipping mask so that the gradient map only affects the right photo. Figuring out different color combinations all comes down to your personal preferences. In this case, I've decided to go with a custom-made blue and turquoise color scheme for the second gradient map. Just like with the previous photo, once the adjustment layer is applied, we really start to notice how bad the edges came out. But no worries, we can always go back and adjust the layer mask with a hard round brush. Take your time with this step, because if you mask too much of the bowler hat away, it will be a little obvious. Select a soft round brush and increase the brush size but lower the opacity to around 30%. Juggle between adding a little bit more of the photo and taking away the areas that you don't want, as well as avoiding the harsh edges we created before. Even though we have a beautiful colorful effect going on, it currently seems like they don't blend well together, so let's fix this. First select the Model 1 layer and set the layer blend mode to lighten. Now select the background layer and add a new adjustment layer of gradient map above it. As soon as we add this gradient, our model will blend right into the background. So make sure to pick a color scheme that works. I decided to go with this beautiful blue and white linear gradient. See? It all works now. You have now completed the duotone double exposure effect. Feel free to put all these layers into a new group and flip back and forth to compare the difference. Pretty cool, right? For an alternative look, you can also push this effect even further. Starting with the color scheme as is, you can continue to add more adjustment layers to play with the colors. Add a new adjustment layer of color lookup above the rest. Cycle through the different 3D LUT files to find a new color scheme you like. To take this composition even further, feel free to add more images to push the double exposure look. All you have to do is use the same techniques we've been using the whole time. Set these layers to different blend modes and use layer masks to help you reveal only the parts of the image that you want. Here I played around with a couple of images of different lighting effects. You can add cool light trails, beautiful bokeh, and even sharp neon lighting for a futuristic effect. And you can even combine them all for a really trippy and psychedelic look. I really hope you enjoyed creating this colorful duotone double exposure effect. Feel free to use it on your images to try out different looks. Now let's move on to our third double exposure effect. We'll learn how to create a double exposure with a surreal theme featuring a hand and stunning landscape photos. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this course. In this next lesson, we'll learn how to make a surreal themed double exposure effect created completely from scratch. Surrealism is one of my favorite art subjects to tackle. I usually create digital paintings with this theme in mind, so I thought I would give it a shot with this double exposure effect. By definition, surrealism is a 20th century art movement that releases the creative potential of the unconscious mind. And in many scenarios, artists pair interesting symbols, photos, or ideas together to create irrational worlds of fantasy purposefully. This particular style of double exposures is inspired by a series I found on Pinterest by artist Brandon Kidwell. So if you're having trouble finding themes for this effect, be sure to explore Pinterest or Google for more options. In this case, Brandon's work is hugely emotive and focuses on placing often mysterious and dreamlike images in the center of a model's head or general anatomy. So our final effect plays with this idea in mind. Let's start by taking a look at our photos. Out of all of the double exposures we created in this course, this one is by far the most complicated. The main reason why is because it requires a total of 5 images. Our main focus of this piece will be a hand stretched outward towards the sky. A lonely figure will be at the center of the hand, complemented by a foggy landscape to enforce a serious mood. With the previous manipulations, I created the effect directly onto the main image. But in this case, we'll need to create a new document to help make the entire scene work. Here are the dimensions I used in the final effect. So create a new document at 2388 by 1999 pixels. Double-click the background layer and rename it BG for background. Then open your hand reference and hold Ctrl-A to select it before copying and pasting it onto a new layer. Hold Ctrl-T to resize this image with the free transform tool. I want to have significant space at the top for the background light to show through, so make sure to keep this in mind. Now, rename the layer Hand. If you haven't already noticed, the hand is facing the wrong side, so let's flip it. Go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Then use the free transform tool again to rotate the image for a better fit. Just like our previous effects, we need to remove the unwanted background. To do this, add a layer mask to the hand layer. Now select the brush tool and use a solid round brush with 100% hardness and opacity to paint black onto the layer mask. Continue painting black onto the layer mask until you've completely removed the entire tree from the background. Looking back at the footage, this step takes approximately 15 to 20 minutes to complete, so be patient with the process. As you refine the layer mask, zoom into the hand to help mask away all the tight edges around the hand and fingers. You'll need to be especially careful with the fingers so that you don't remove too much. Keep the brush set at 100% hardness to retain a hard edge. As always, if you make any mistakes at any moment, hit Ctrl-Z to undo your work, or simply reset or even reverse the background and foreground colors by hitting D or X on your keyboard. Continue to remove the tree. The rotation tool is especially helpful with this step. Rotate the canvas as much as you need to help you around the fingers. This will make the process much easier whether you're using a pen tablet or even a regular mouse. Once this process is done, it'll look similar to this result. We want to make sure there are absolutely no remnants remaining from the previous tree background. Now we can continue to build this double exposure. Let's start by adding more photos. Select the background layer, then copy and paste the sky reference onto a new layer above it. Feel free to adjust the size with free transform or rotate it to your desired look. In this case, I like how the clouds slightly mirror the shape of the hand, so reposition it until you're happy with the result. Now, rename the layer Sky. To add a sense of depth of field, we'll add a slight blur to the cloud picture. With the layer selected, go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, adding a radius of 8 pixels. Feel free to experiment with this effect, but I believe that subtlety is the key here. Usually it's best to keep building the effect with more images, but I also want to keep in mind the kind of color palette I'll need to achieve the final moody design. So, create a new layer, rename it Color, and use the Paint Bucket tool to fill the layer with a desaturated gold color. Then set the layer blend mode to Color. See how the effect is already coming along? Let's move on by adjusting the lighting of our current photos. Select the hand layer and add a new adjustment layer of curves above it. Right-click to create a clipping mask so that the curves layer only affects the hand. Now adjust the curves as follows to create a much deeper lighting scheme. Lower the curve near the shadows, but bring it back up towards the middle for more contrast and intensity. Remember, the final result shows intense sunlight behind the model, so I'll need to make the hand dark enough for a slightly silhouette effect. This will also help to make the unnatural surrealistic theme seem, at least, a lot more realistic. Let's add in the double exposure effect. Select the hand layer again and copy and paste the road image onto a new clipped layer below the curves adjustment. It will automatically become clipped since the hand layer is selected, but you'll need to reposition the layer above the curves. Now resize the road picture with the Free Transform tool. Use the Move tool to reposition it so that the road lines are centered within the hand. Then rename the layer Road. Let's add some light. Select the sky layer and copy and paste the sun eclipse onto a new layer above it. Reposition the light so that it's more centered behind the hand. Then set the layer blend mode to hard light and rename it Shine. This is officially the foundation for our double exposure effect. Let's experiment with layer masks to create a seamless blend. Select the road layer and add a layer mask. Use a soft round brush with 0% hardness to mask away the areas of the road that are currently covering the lower hand. But don't push this part too far, as I just want to reveal some of the natural hair showing through on the model's wrist. Keep the brush opacity at a much lower range for this time. Around 55% should do. Now, slightly mask around the fingers. Follow the natural shape of the hand and reveal parts of the fingers like the nails and wrinkles for a more realistic look. Let's adjust the colors even more. Create a new curves adjustment layer above the road. Then set it as a clipping mask to the hand. Create a similar curve to this one for even more contrast and intensity. Then lower the opacity to 65%. Set the layer blend mode to overlay to help bring out the road and hand pictures. For even more sunlight, create a new layer above the sky. Set the layer to overlay and use a soft round brush with 0% hardness to paint white onto the layer. Create more light by starting with a low opacity, then feel free to increase it to 50% to pump up the contrast. Lower the layer opacity as desired. Here I chose 92%. Great job so far, we're getting close to the end. Now that we have the intense light behind the hand, we need to make sure it's affecting the edges around it. Select the layer mask of the hand. Use a soft round brush to paint black onto the mask to soften the edges. This will create an incredible backlighting effect. Immediately, this simple effect creates a believable result. Increase the size of the brush and play around with opacity to continue softening the hand. Slightly mask the inner parts of the fingers as well as the tips of them to help blend them into the sky. I think that this step is by far the coolest transformation of the entire process. Feel free to adjust the mask for the road too, allowing bits of the hand and fingers to show through what is otherwise cut off by the foggy sky. Continue to mask the hand until you're happy with the result. To create an even more dramatic story, we'll add a person into this manipulation. Use the rectangular marquee tool to select the silhouette, then copy and paste it onto a new layer clipped above the road. Add a layer mask, then use a soft round brush to mask away the background until it's completely gone. Once you're through, lower the opacity even further and use the same soft brush to diffuse the harsh edges. Continue doing this all around the silhouette for a more believable effect. Adjust the size if necessary, lower the opacity to 70%, and diffuse the silhouette even more for added realism. Now the person just needs a shadow. Duplicate the layer and reclip the copy to the hand. Hold Ctrl-T to free transform the shadow, bringing it down first to flip it. Adjust the perspective and angle by holding the Control key while selecting the anchor points. Try to create a realistic shadow to the best of your ability. Then lower the opacity. Let's finish this effect with a few color adjustments. For even more mood, we'll create a quick vignette. Create a new layer above the rest. Then select the gradient tool, making sure the foreground to transparent option, radial gradient option, and reverse option are all selected. Create a radial gradient using the same desaturated gold from before. Then set the layer to overlay and adjust the opacity to 60%. Last but not least is a new adjustment layer of color lookup. Add the color lookup adjustment layer and set the 3D LUT file to Foggy Night. This filter creates a dramatic cool undertone that makes for an incredibly powerful effect. All in all, it really matches our mood. Then lower the opacity to 52% and you've completed this final double exposure effect. I hope you've enjoyed creating this amazing surreal-inspired double exposure. Join me for the last lesson to this course, where we'll go over a final recap of everything we've learned. Welcome back to how to make a double exposure effect in Adobe Photoshop. My name is Melody Nieves and I've been your instructor for this course. I hope you've enjoyed diving into one of the coolest trends in design today, the double exposure effect. Let's go over a quick recap of everything we've learned. Make your double exposure stand out with powerful themes. Always start with a clear plan in mind and ask yourself these questions to help you figure out the mood and design of your work. When picking photos, make sure they're high-quality images with versatile compositions and avoid any awkwardly cropped models or landscapes. Experiment often for the best results. Keep in mind that different types of photos will yield different effects. Consider styling, colors, and general composition when pairing photos together. This may even mean that you need to spend a little extra time finding the ones that work best with one another. When creating your final effect, pay attention to Photoshop's core tools to help you achieve seamless double exposures in much less time. If you need a little refresher, then remember to get familiar with layer masks, clipping masks, adjustment layers, and layer blend modes to make the most out of this effect. For an even more polished look, utilize all your skills from different digital mediums. Incorporate photo retouching, photo manipulation, or general compositing and digital painting techniques to create the desired look. But most of all, remember to have fun. These effects are not only a great way to brush up on your Photoshop skills, but they also give you plenty of inspiration to keep pushing the bounds of your imagination. For more incredible effects, access thousands of amazing assets from Envato Elements to create beautiful double exposures. Photoshop Actions, for instance, help you achieve this effect with just a single click of the button. Find me on social media for even more tips, and remember to share your results with us all. My name is Melody Nieves, and from all of us here at Envato Tuts Plus, good luck on your creative journey.